Back to the Future. The Back to the Future trilogy looks simple on the surface, but its branching timelines and paradoxes quietly make its story one of the most confusing in mainstream sci-fi. Back to the Future released in 1985, directed by Robert Zemeckis, with sequels in 1989 and 1990. Time travel is powered by the DeLorean's flux capacitor, built by Dr. Emmett "Doc" Brown, activated at 88 miles per hour with 1.21 gigawatts of power. The films primarily use a mutable single timeline model, where altering the past changes the future, as seen when Marty returns to 1985 and finds an upgraded McFly family after improving his parents' confidence in 1955. The first film introduces classic grandfather paradox stakes. If Marty fails to get his parents together, he erases his own existence, represented by him and his siblings fading from a photograph. Part 2 complicates things with an alternate timeline. Biff steals the sports almanac, gives it to his younger self in 1955, and creates a dystopian 1985 where he's rich and powerful, forcing Doc to explain that changing the past can branch reality. Doc's chalkboard explanation in Part 2 has become an iconic diagram widely referenced in pop culture and online explainers to visualize diverging timelines and time travel splits in other movies. The trilogy also toys with predestination. Doc reading Marty's letter in 1955 lets him wear a bulletproof vest in 1985, implying Marty's interference changes an event that already happened from his perspective. The trilogy laid down the visual language for movie time travel, especially the idea of branching timelines and paradoxes. Doc Brown's chalkboard has effectively become a template for explaining far more complex films, making these movies a perfect starting point before diving into much messier timelines. The Terminator. The Terminator franchise begins as a closed causal loop, but spirals into a tangle of overwritten futures and conflicting timelines across sequels and reboots. The original The Terminator from 1984, directed by James Cameron, uses a closed-loop model. Skynet sends a T-800 back to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, while humanity sends Kyle Reese to protect her. Reese fathers John Connor, meaning Skynet indirectly creates its own enemy. Time travel is established as originating in a future war where Skynet became self-aware and built a time displacement device, sending back cyborg assassins while the Resistance sends protectors. Terminator 2, Judgment Day, from 1991, introduces the idea that no fate but what we make can change the future. Destroying Cyberdyne's research and the T-800's parts supposedly prevents Judgment Day, contradicting the closed loop. Later entries, including Terminator 3, Genesis, and Dark Fate, repeatedly reset or revise Judgment Day's date, implying either branching timelines or an elastic fate that keeps snapping back into similar apocalypses. Fans and analysts often point out paradox issues. If Judgment Day is truly prevented in Terminator 2, Skynet shouldn't exist to send Terminators back. Yet sequel plots require it to keep happening in revised forms. The Terminator shows how even a neat closed-loop premise becomes confusing once sequels try to undo fate, forcing the franchise to bend or break its own rules. It's a vivid example of how long-running intellectual property often sacrifices coherent timelines for new stories. Looper. Rian Johnson's film Looper from 2012 mixes mob hits with time travel, then undermines its own rules with one of the most debated self-sacrifice endings in sci-fi. Released in 2012, Looper is set in 2044 with time travel illegal and controlled by future criminal syndicates, who send victims 30 years into the past to be killed by loopers. The central concept of closing the loop means the syndicate eventually sends the looper's own future self back to be killed. The looper receives a big payoff and knows they'll live out the next 30 years until that moment. A notorious mid-film sequence shows a looper named Seth letting his older self escape. The syndicate mutilates young Seth in the present with scars and amputations, and the film shows those changes appearing in real time on old Seth's body as he runs. This scene implies a dynamic, constantly updating timeline, where as history changes, the older version's body instantly reflects new injuries and lost limbs. The ending, however, has young Joe shoot himself to prevent older Joe from killing a child and creating the future warlord called the Rainmaker. Older Joe disappears immediately, even though his life up to that point should already be fixed in the timeline. Critics and fans note this clashes with the earlier instant update logic. If changes propagate gradually, older Joe shouldn't just vanish when his younger self dies. Johnson has acknowledged in interviews that Looper embraces a somewhat hand-wavy approach to time travel, prioritizing thematic closure over airtight mechanics. Looper offers a textbook case of a film establishing clear time rules, then bending them for emotional payoff. The internal contradiction between Seth's scene and Joe's sacrifice is central to why this timeline still sparks explainer videos and debates. Source code. Source code from 2011 uses a repeating 8-minute simulation that may secretly branch into new realities, making its ending far more confusing than its premise. Directed by Duncan Jones, Source code follows Captain Coulter Stevens, who repeatedly experiences the last 8 minutes of a train bombing through the source code program. The film initially frames each run as a simulation based on victims' memories, not actual time travel, meaning nothing he does should change the past. In the finale, Stevens prevents the bombing in one run and then appears to continue living in that reality with passenger Christina, suggesting he has created or shifted into a new, persistent timeline. Analysts note this contradicts the only "a simulation" rule, implying either that source code accesses parallel universes or that the film retroactively adopts a multiverse model in its final moments. Source code looks like a simple time loop thriller, but ends on a reality-bending twist that forces viewers to reinterpret what the program actually does. Edge of Tomorrow. Edge of Tomorrow from 2014 turns a learn-by-dying time loop into a puzzle about exactly when and how that loop finally stops. Based on the Japanese light novel All You Need Is Kill, the film stars Tom Cruise as Major William Cage, who gains looping powers after being infected with alien mimic blood. Each death resets his day back to the military base, allowing him and Rita Vertasky to refine tactics against the alien Omega. The ending shows Cage destroying the Omega and then waking up even earlier in the timeline, in a world where the alien threat has apparently collapsed overnight, despite his powers supposedly being lost. Commentators argue this implies either one last reset triggered by the Omega's death, or an unexplained timeline overwrite, making the final reset's rules different from all previous loops. The film plays fair with its rules for most of the runtime, then leaves viewers debating whether the ending is a clean victory or a logic-breaking because cool reset. Interstellar. Interstellar from 2014 turns relativity and higher dimensional time into a labyrinth, especially once Cooper enters the Tesseract behind the black hole Gargantua. Directed by Christopher Nolan and released in 2014, the film follows Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, who leaves Earth through a wormhole near Saturn to find habitable planets after environmental collapse. The wormhole and the black hole Gargantua cause extreme time dilation. 1 hour on the water planet Miller's World equals roughly 7 years on Earth, which explains why decades pass for Murph while Cooper experiences days. The mission Plan A depends on solving the gravitational equation. Cooper ends up inside a tesseract constructed by advanced future humans inside Gargantua, where time is visualized as a physical dimension tied to Murph's bedroom across her life. Inside the tesseract, Cooper communicates with young Murph via gravitational anomalies, knocking books, changing dust patterns, and manipulating a watch's second hand, revealing he is the ghost she thought she saw as a child. This creates a predestination paradox. Murph's discovery of the theory that saves humanity depends on future Cooper, whose existence requires humanity to have survived. The film also implies a stable timeline. Cooper's actions were always part of history, yet the notion of future humans creating the Tesseract raises questions about who started the loop. Scientists have praised the depiction of relativity, but note that the Tesseract and five-dimensional beings are speculative devices to dramatize complex physics. Interstellar is confusing not because it cheats its rules, but because it visualizes real relativity alongside a speculative time-as-space construct. It blends hard science and metaphysical loops, leaving viewers debating who saved whom and when. Arrival. Arrival, from 2016, hides a non-linear timeline in plain sight, reclassifying its flashbacks as future visions once viewers understand the alien language. Directed by Denis Villeneuve and released in 2016, Arrival centers on linguist Louise Banks, played by Amy Adams, recruited to communicate with heptapod aliens who arrive in 12 shell-like ships around the world. The heptapod's written language is circular and non-linear. As Louise learns it, she begins to perceive time non-linearly, experiencing scenes from her future as if they were memories. The film opens with what appears to be Louise mourning a daughter who died young, framing it as backstory. Later, it's revealed these are actually glimpses of her future child with physicist Ian Donnelly. The key twist is that learning the language changes human cognition. Events remembered by Louise have not yet happened from her original perspective. A pivotal future vision shows Louise speaking Mandarin to Chinese General Shang at a gala, recounting his wife's dying words. This knowledge allows present-day Louise to avert war by calling him with information she hasn't actually lived through yet. This creates a causality puzzle. Louise's future memory depends on her present choice, which in turn depends on that memory, another predestination loop. Arrival uses time perception, not machines, to bend the timeline, making viewers retroactively question which scenes were past, present, or future. By the way, if you're enjoying what you're watching, I post videos like this constantly. I'd really appreciate a subscribe. Tenet. Tenet, from 2020, is Christopher Nolan's most overtly time-bending film, using inversion to make time run backward for people and objects across overlapping operations. Released in 2020, Tenet follows an unnamed protagonist, played by John David Washington, recruited into an organization called Tenet to prevent a future-developed algorithm from destroying the world. The film introduces time inversion, where people or objects pass through a turnstile and begin moving backward through time relative to the rest of the world, breathing via oxygen masks because entropy is reversed. Key set pieces like the Oslo Freeport heist and the highway chase are shown twice, once in forward time and once from an inverted perspective, with the same events overlapping. The climactic temporal pincer movement features two teams, one moving forward in time, the other inverted, coordinating across a 10-minute window with different temporal directions. The ending reveals that the protagonist will found Tenet in the future and will later recruit Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, who in turn is the one who recruited him earlier. A bootstrap paradox that means their friendship runs in opposite chronological directions. Neil's final walk toward his implied death at Stalsk 12 is framed as the end of his story for him, but the beginning for the protagonist, emphasizing crisscrossed personal timelines. Tenet is deliberately structured like a palindrome, mirroring its title and demanding viewers track characters moving both forward and backward through shared events. It's one of the clearest examples of a film that almost requires diagrams to fully parse. Primer. Shane Carruth's micro-budget Primer from 2004 is notorious for its dense dialogue and overlapping time loops, spawning some of the most complicated fan-made timelines in sci-fi history. Released in 2004 and made for around $7,000, Primer follows engineers Abe and Aaron, who accidentally invent a time machine while working on a project in a garage. Their device is a box that allows a user to enter at one time and exit at an earlier time, with the limitation that you can't travel back to before the box was switched on. Initially, they used the boxes to loop back about 6 hours to make stock market bets, carefully avoiding interacting with their past selves. The film's complexity escalates as characters create multiple boxes, perform overlapping runs, and begin interfering with each other's trips. One character even builds a large warehouse-sized box to travel further back. Fail-safe boxes, double crosses, and off-screen manipulations result in multiple versions of Abe and Aaron coexisting, some of whom drug or circumvent others. The film offers almost no exposition. Technical jargon is thrown around casually, and key actions happen between scenes, forcing viewers to infer the shape of the timeline from tiny visual cues. Flowcharts attempting to map all trips often differ, and even Carruth has declined to provide a definitive official diagram, fueling the film's reputation as nearly impenetrable. Primer is the ultimate you'll-need-a-chart time travel film. Its refusal to spoon-feed the audience turns its timeline into a puzzle that many viewers never fully solve, even after multiple rewatches. Predestination. Predestination, from 2014, traps its main character in a closed time loop so tight that every major role in the story is ultimately the same person. Released in 2014 and directed by the Spierig brothers, Predestination adapts Robert A. Heinlein's 1959 short story, All You Zombies. Ethan Hawke plays a time-traveling temporal agent who uses a device to jump between years to stop the terrorist Fizzlebomber. The central character Jane, born intersex and raised as a girl, later transitions and becomes John after surgery. Through a series of time jumps, John is revealed to be both Jane's lover and the father of their child. That child is kidnapped and taken back in time to be left at the orphanage where Jane grew up, meaning Jane/John is their own mother and father, a classic ontological paradox. The film further reveals that Hawke's agent is a later, altered version of John, and the Fizzlebomber is an even older, degraded version of the same person. This creates a closed causal loop where one person occupies the roles of victim, perpetrator, rescuer, parent, and child, with no external origin point for the timeline's events. Critics note that mapping Jane/John/agent/Fizzle's aging and jumps in strict chronological order is extremely challenging, even though the film technically adheres to a single self-consistent timeline. Predestination demonstrates how a single timeline story can feel more confusing than multiverse tales when one person is literally everyone. Its loop turns identity itself into a paradox. Donnie Darko. Donnie Darko from 2001 hides a full time travel rulebook in an in-universe text, making its seemingly surreal plot secretly about tangent universes and a doomed teenager. Written and directed by Richard Kelly and released in 2001, the film follows Donnie, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, a troubled teen who narrowly escapes death when a jet engine crashes into his bedroom. Donnie is visited by Frank, a man in a creepy rabbit suit, who tells him the world will end in 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds. The director's cut and supplementary materials introduce The Philosophy of Time Travel, a fictional book that explains the existence of a primary universe and a tangent universe. According to this mythology, the jet engine is an artifact that appears in the tangent universe. Donnie is a living receiver tasked with returning it to restore the primary universe. At the end, the timeline appears to reset. Donnie dies in bed when the engine falls, preventing the tangent universe events, while characters retain faint residual emotions or déjà vu. Most of this explanatory framework is not fully presented in the theatrical cut, which is why many viewers experience the film as purely dreamlike and incoherent on first watch. Donnie Darko is confusing because its rulebook is mostly off-screen. Understanding the timeline often requires external reading, making it a cult favorite for fans who enjoy decoding hidden lore. Coherence. Coherence from 2013 turns a dinner party into a multiverse nightmare, when a passing comet causes realities to overlap and characters to unknowingly switch timelines. Released in 2013 and shot largely with improvisation, Coherence follows 8 friends at a dinner party on the night a comet passes Earth. A power outage and strange events lead them to discover that their neighborhood has split into multiple versions, each house containing slightly different versions of themselves. The characters realize that whenever they pass through the darkness between houses, they may be entering a different reality, creating a maze of subtly divergent timelines. The main character, M, eventually decides her own group is too dysfunctional and tries to replace herself in a better timeline by attacking and abducting that universe's M. By the end, multiple M versions collide, and the film finishes with an ambiguous phone call that suggests even her final timeline may be destabilizing. Coherence shows how low-budget sci-fi can create massive timeline confusion purely through character interactions and subtle differences, without any computer-generated imagery. Everything Everywhere. Everything Everywhere All at Once from 2022 weaponizes multiverse chaos, jumping so quickly between timelines that keeping a single continuity straight becomes part of the joke. Released in 2022, and directed by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, the film follows Evelyn Wong, played by Michelle Yeoh, a laundromat owner who learns she can access skills and memories from countless alternate selves. Verse jumping allows characters to instantaneously connect to different timelines, where different choices branched into wildly different lives, such as movie star, hibachi chef, or hot dog fingers. The film is divided into 3 chapters: Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, reflecting the escalating overload of universes and Evelyn's eventual acceptance of her many possible lives. Timelines are not strictly mapped. Instead, rapid montages show dozens of Evelyn variants flashing by, implying near-infinite branches. The central emotional arc hinges on choosing kindness and connection in the Prime Laundromat universe, despite having access to seemingly more glamorous alternatives. This film embraces confusion as style, reflecting the overwhelming feel of modern life and decision fatigue through a deliberately untrackable multiverse timeline. If you found this interesting, consider subscribing so you catch every new video. Thanks for watching.